Scott Reid standing by, CTV News political commentator, with his take on this and the repercussions, Scott, of not holding a public inquiry for the government and for the Prime Minister personally. What do you think?
Well, an entirely predictable response from the opposition. In particular, Polyev just swings a sledgehammer. I mean, when a when a small tool might do, he nevertheless brings the biggest thing in the toolbox and has to, of course, ascribe motive to the government. They're, as far as he is concerned, engaged with Beijing in some traitorous, treasonous plot. So I don't think his rhetoric does him any great justice. But at the end of the day, I think what we're seeing is that the absence of a public inquiry leads people to move to their partisan corners, and that's what we're getting. So the government has decided that's enough. We're going to fight it out. We'll just tough this thing out. That's what the recommendation is. And in effect, what they're doing is they're saying we don't believe that the opposition can sustain this as an issue that will dominate Canadians' thoughts throughout the summer, back into the fall, and really change the course of not just the next election, but the next number of months.
They have said, the government, and David Johnston has said, look, we can't have a public inquiry because this is classified intelligence, so we can't make it public. It puts people at risk. But is it not possible to do it in a certain way where you could kind of still have a public inquiry, but make sure there are perhaps guardrails so that, classified, highly sensitive intelligence is not made public, but you still have an independent judge in charge of a public inquiry?
I believe so, and I believe so because I look to, Justice Dennis O'Connor, who looked into the Morar affair in the early 2000s. I was part of a government that asked him to take a look at that matter, and it involved Five Eyes intelligence. It involved rendition of a citizen to a foreign country. It involved our allies. It involved a war, and so I think you can manage it. What that wouldn't do is it would not silence Pierre Poilievre. Pierre Poilievre would remain unsatisfied with that. He would say, well, any restrictions, he would seize upon any restrictions, any guardrails whatsoever as evidence that really, the important material is being concealed from Canadians. But he at least would be forced into that tiny piece of real estate. He'd be forced into that tiny corner. And of course, it would also remove the distraction of people arguing about David Johnston and how close he really is to the Trudeau family, because presumably you would appoint a separate judge. These hearings, remember, that are going to proceed over the summer will be held by David Johnston, and that means that he'll continue to be a target for partisan attack.
Do you think this story is hitting home with voters, Scott? If so, how?
Well, a couple of things. I don't want to be glib. I don't just want to be the political analyst that comes on and talks like a jerk about, the scorecard of, who's up, who's down in the pure partisan Olympics. This is an important issue. This is about the integrity of our democratic institutions and our democratic processes. I happen to think that David Johnston got it right insofar as I believe there are large efforts to interfere with those institutions, but I don't believe they've succeeded. And I think, frankly, Canadians care about that issue. I don't think that they're going to vote on that issue. I don't think that they literally believe that, China is turning the course of events here in Canada sufficient that it's going to cost them to cast their ballot differently as compared to, say, the price of gas, the price of groceries, and those other, kitchen table issues. So does it matter? It matters a great deal. Is it going to dictate the terms of the next election? Not necessarily. Does that mean that the government should still treat it seriously, even as a political matter, that it would like to get this past them, that it would like to actually give itself the breathing space to get back to its governing agenda? I would think so.
Scott, always good to have you part of our coverage and lend us your insights. Thank you.
Thanks, Todd.